The next subject is one that is truly a serious subject for our industry, one that all parts of our industry care about deeply, and that is the issue of digital safety. And so today we have the leaders of the major industry associations who are committed to working collaboratively to come together on this issue that matters to all of us. So I'm going to welcome back John Montgomery, who was our MC this morning. John will handle this panel, and John will be joined by people that need very little introduction, but Bob Liodice, who is President and CEO of the ANA, Nancy Hill, President and CEO of the 4A's, and Mike Zaneis, EVP and General Counsel of the IAB. Please welcome them.
Hi, well, thanks for joining me up here. It couldn't be a more important subject because nothing is more important to our brands and in the environment of media investment than brand safety. Brands aren't going to invest in an environment unless they feel totally safe and totally secure, and I think it speaks to the absolute foundation of what we do. The associations up here, the ANA, the IAB, and the 4A's are going to introduce you to an initiative that strongly addresses safety in the supply chain and makes brands as safe as possible. Now, Bob Liodice, President of the ANA, you've been an advocate and a driving force for brand safety and trust in the supply chain, and brands that have been built up over decades and have had billions of dollars invested in them are really going to be assured that the digital environment is safe for them. And importantly, they're getting what they pay for. This is something that's really important to your membership, right?
Yeah, it's not only important to our membership for the obvious reasons, but it has to go with the notion of the safety of the digital supply chain. When we look at the highest area of opportunity to be able to build our brands, which is through all the current digital platforms, we need to be able to do that and invest in that with the highest confidence that it's not only is it going to work, but it is that we get what we pay for, number one. Number two, the issues that we're now facing in the digital supply chain introduce one key word that I think wobbles the knees of marketers, and that's criminal activity. We cannot afford to be associated with perpetrating criminal activity to the point where we not only are going to influence our customers and consumers, but we're also facilitating activity which is damaging to our entire ecosystem. So there are multiple reasons for being able to do this, and to do it with the highest level of confidence. And John, you opened it up this morning talking about the word trust. We have to be able to trust the digital supply chain as a vehicle for us to be able to put our investments in.
Good, well said. And Nancy, if this is what our clients want, and it's up to us to forge that kind of environment and agencies to support this initiative in making sure that the brands are operating in a safe environment. This is something that you're right behind, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's something that came out of, for the last 3 years now, the three organizations have held a joint board meeting in May, and this initiative really came out of last year's joint board meeting as something that really we needed to take on. We didn't know what kind of shape it was going to take exactly at that moment in time, but as we've gone through this and developed what we now are calling TAG, or the Trustworthy Accountability Group, we recognize that this is something we had to come together to fight. And I had a long talk with a lot of our board members who are not necessarily in the media buying space about why this was as important to the creative community as it was to the media community. And basically, all of those dollars, and the numbers have been floated around as high as $6.3 billion in fraud, all of those dollars are not going into advertising that is really supporting that creative work. It also is not going into maybe better compensation models. There's a lot of different things that are impacted by this. So it's important to the entire ecosystem, not just the media buying and selling ecosystem.
So Mike, you EVP and General Counsel of IAB, but you're also the interim CEO of TAG, Trustworthy Accountability Group. Tell us a little bit about what you think it needs to do, what it will do, what the objectives are, and how we're going to address this.
Sure, and Bob and Nancy set it up very nicely. When we looked at the problem, you hear numbers like $6.3 billion, and it shocks the system, it shocks the digital supply chain. So what we had to do is we had to take a step back. As 3 trade associations that represent the entire digital supply chain, marketers, agencies, and IAB represents publishers, including the third parties, we had to look at how we were being victimized, frankly, by these criminal networks. And we look at kind of a chain of elements of a crime, which ultimately leads to fraud, which we all care so deeply about. And we saw these criminal networks coming in and stealing all the valuable content that you all put together and spend so much time and energy, your imagination, your blood and sweat and tears creating. And then they go out and they victimize our customers, the public, by distributing this malware and taking over their computers and stitching millions of them together into these botnets so that ultimately they can drive non-human, illegitimate traffic back to their website and defraud all of us to the tune of $6.3 billion, if not more. And in order to combat that challenge, then this really is our criminal networks that are attacking us. We needed to go on the offense, and we need to take the fight to the criminals wherever they are perpetrating these crimes so that we're no longer just the easy mark out there in the digital supply chain. So we need to protect content. We need to harden consumers' computers so that they don't become these botnets. And ultimately, the most important thing we can do is we have to identify non-human traffic, and we have to filter it out of the supply chain, period. And that's what TAG is all about. It's about bringing the supply chain together to create solutions, sort of a good housekeeping seal of approval, if you will. So then buyers know who they're doing business with.
Right.
That it's a trusted relationship, a legitimate companies, and that you're buying what you think you're paying for, what you know you're paying for, but what you think you're buying. That's the real key. And if you just look at the TAG board of directors that was announced 3 weeks ago, it's a who's who of the industry, and folks like Rob Norman from GroupM. And if you look on stage, Nancy and the 4A's have done a wonderful job of bringing the industry leaders together this week. And Tim Armstrong from AOL kicked us off, and his number 2, the president of AOL, Bob Lord, is on the board. Bill Konigsberg, who interviewed him, is on the board. You have folks like Mark Pritchett from Procter & Gamble on the board. And then brand publishers like Ziff Davis, Wall Street Journal, and others participating. That commitment is really key to combating fraud and the rest of the criminal activity in the digital supply chain.
Yeah, it's a little bit like we have to stop being victims,
Right.
Because we have been victims. We have to stop being victims and go back on the offensive. What about compliance? And this is really good news for premium publishers, right? I mean, the majority of the publishers we deal with are the white hats of the world and don't do this. And so I think that they will also be the beneficiaries of the $6.3 billion that's going to the bad guys is now going to start getting funneled to the good guys. But what are we going to do about compliance and as people join up, how are we going to know that they're TAG compliant?
Well, John, you hit on the right issue, compliance. What we need is adoption across the supply chain. We need to make sure that everybody is participating. We've all been enablers of this. From marketers and agencies to publishers, ad networks, exchanges, we have all done something to allow this criminal activity to infiltrate our industry at such a massive extent. And so we all have to be part of the solution. You talk about branded publishers, nobody wants to sell non-human traffic, but if you're a branded publisher and you are purchasing, one of the things that the ANA White Ops study found was then over 50% of what we call sourced traffic. So if you're a big branded publisher You have a lot of organic traffic. People type in your, whatever it is, your URL, and they go to your website. They trust you. We know that that's human, legitimate traffic. But at the end of the month, you've sold X amount of inventory, and maybe it's a slow month, didn't have a lot going on in your segment. And so you go out and you buy traffic, you source it. Over 50% of that source traffic was found in the ANA White Ops study to be non-human traffic. So even the white hats, the brand publishers, have to be more diligent about how they are acquiring traffic and offering it for resale. Just as marketers and agencies want to know who to do business with. And so you have to have a registration system, baseline, so that you know that you're not purchasing through a fly-by-night entity that was just stood up last month, maybe has never paid taxes. All they are a P.O. box in some, Ukraine or something like that.
Well, the P.O. box is in the suburbs in the United States, but it actually roots back to, certain parts of the world.
Yes.
But I think the important part here is that over the years, we've enabled so many different kinds of fraud. It's not just the bots, it's also the kind of fraudulent activity that includes piracy and pirated sites. And I think what we have to do now is not only put a stop to what's happening, but we have to put the organization in a position where we can stay ahead of this. Because believe me, even if we stop them now, they're not going to go away. It's like whack-a-mole, we've all talked about it. You get them all down and then they're just going to pop up in a different form or fashion. Yeah. So what I hope for TAG's future is that this is an organization that is actively seeking this out and stopping it before it becomes accepted behavior.
Let me build on what Nancy was saying, is that at a recent conference that we had, when Kellogg's, a specific advertiser, when they looked at the total issue that was emanating from this particular tree, and they looked at fraud, they looked at issues with respect to piracy and malware, they actually found that for every 1,000 impressions put through the digital chain, only 407 reached the consumer. So that meant almost 60% of their investment was disappearing to either non-human traffic or to other sources and not its intended source. And that's what we have to stop, because, hey, we're all for improving efficiencies and things that we can control. But in this types of situations, we have no control. We have essentially ceded control to those that want to rob us and who have the ability to rob us almost at will, to take from us as much as they want, because nobody has in the way to stop them. So it's just almost like an open door policy to say, come on in, stick your hand into and grab my wallet and walk away. And that's the equivalent of what we have.
And it strikes me that part of TAG is also about finding the right help to be able to combat this, because we don't have the technology, most of us don't have the technology in this room to recognize a black hat site versus a white hat site from a piracy perspective. So we'll be working with digital DAPs, DAAPs, which will enable us to identify which are the pirated sites and which are not the pirated sites, create lists of the sites that we can use safely and exclude those that we can't. And before we were really guessing at this thing, now we'll have real technology behind us.
Yes.
TAG will help us vet this technology. Is that part of where we're going?
Absolutely. If you haven't read it, John's referring to the anti-piracy program that was announced last month as part of TAG, and he wrote a wonderful op-ed supporting that program. And thank you for your leadership on the anti-piracy work over many years. Think of it as a tool. And so a DAP is a real-time service provider to help identify when an ad is about to run in an undesirable site, on an undesirable site, in this case, a pirate site. And so that you have certainty that you are able to filter and serve ads on the right types of sites. So if we have, at the TAG has four, it's worth noting, has 4 programs, 4 pillars. Piracy is one, fraud is another, malware, as I mentioned, and then we have this other pillar called transparency, and that's a little bit what we talked about, making sure you know who you're doing business with. And each of them has a work group and is creating tools that will be available to the marketplace. And the idea is then as companies come into compliance, they utilize the tools that are available, then they can get a tag certification. And then you all know that this looks like a pretty good company, then I want to do business with.
So a lot of people have asked, why don't we just develop a blacklist? Well, we can't do that. As trade associations, that's
Right.
not something that we can do because it could be construed as
Anti-competitive.
anti-competitive. But we can compile a whitelist. And then you can choose to only deal with the people on the whitelist and not those who aren't on the whitelist. And I think that's an important distinction to make. The other thing I think that is important is that many of the media agencies and the media, and even the agencies who have media departments, have some technology in place to identify parts and pieces of this. And one of the things that early in these discussions, I think it was Bill Tucker who said it, that what you have to think about it is that the agencies have the police force that are actually catching in the act. But what we have to do as a group is bring down the overall crime level. Right. And so if you think about it as the city trying to bring down the crime level, and then you have the cops trying to take care of crime, that's the way we have to look at it.
It's the perfect analogy because there are a number of programs in place. Literally, we have police working on solving these problems. One of the first things we did when we created our anti-malware working group was to create a formal collaboration of information sharing with federal law enforcement. So the U.S. Department of Justice and the FBI, so that we as an industry can bring in the threats. When you see advertisements that contain infected code, you can share that across, so it comes into an information sharing platform and it goes out to the rest of the industry, so that we are effectively sort of turning off the switch for these criminals. But then it goes out to federal law enforcement, because we need more cops on the beat. And we need to work with them. We need to learn from some of our other industries, things like the financial services sector, who have done this so effectively. And we need to just be more proactive as an industry.
Bob, I think you said earlier that this is criminal activity.
Yes.
And I was reminded of this. I was invited to speak about this stuff at an advocate convention, and the money that goes towards funding pirate sites and malware is often money that funds terrorist organizations, child trafficking. I mean, the most horrendous stuff is funded. These are the beneficiaries of this of what's harming our brands, which makes it doubly insulting and urgent for us to address this. But it really is criminal activity,
everyone.
right? Yeah.
It affects everyone. Everybody in this room is being affected in some manner, shape, or form. And we're all, I think Mike said it before, or Nancy did it, that we're all enablers of this situation, which has to be cut off at its sources. And we're only learning how to do this at this point in time. And I think we're going to be extraordinarily effective because we're combining the resources of the entire ecosystem, which I think we're well established here in the US, but we also need to engage the balance of the countries around the world, because digital is in fact global. So we have to recognize this is just not a US problem, it's in fact a global problem.
And that's because the digital supply chain is increasingly a global supply chain. When GroupM makes ad purchases, they often want it to be a global campaign. And so we know that it's a problem, the criminal activity is a problem around the globe. And so some of these tools scale very nicely. And we have to partner with our international sister organizations in a very collaborative way.
I guess another reason why this is good for our trusted publisher partners is that if we were making a media planning decision in an agency and we looked at a trusted partner and one that is perhaps not compliant or hasn't gone through the process, one's really going to choose the trusted partner, aren't you? And so that's good. It's good news for publishers, the 90% of whom are trusted partners. So.
I think that's right, and you're already starting to see some of this language in insertion orders and master service agreements and the like, requiring all, no fraudulent traffic should be purchased, and it won't be paid for, things like make goods and such. You're going to see that more and more, and that's why it's important then really get these programs up and running quickly. You need to have people to buy from. So the desire is there from the buyers, and the supply side is getting there very quickly. I can tell you that the level of commitment from the buy side, the ANA and 4A's membership, is matched by IAB's own membership from the publishers, the networks, the platforms, the exchanges. We just have to quickly build the tools so that they can come into compliance.
So in the minute or so that we've got left, what is the audience going to expect over the next month, 2 months to hear about TAG? What can they do? What must they do to help? How can they get behind this really important thing?
Well, let me ask this question. I think Bill Duggan may have asked this at the ANA conference a month or so ago. Just curious, how many people, by a show of hands, had heard of TAG before today?
Not very many.
Okay.
Not bad,
Not
but
that many.
not overwhelming either, right?
I think there was a handful at the ANA conference. There are 2 handfuls now. You will be hearing a lot about this. Pay attention to it. It will actually become a common part of the purchasing process, and we will be communicating on a consistent, robust path going forward, and you will see products roll out. Most of you in the room won't have to worry about these products, but you'll be responsible for making sure that you do business with trusted sources.
You know, John, it really comes down to something very simple. You think about the resources that we can apply against this particular issue. And if we are successful, we save billions of dollars. Invest millions, save billions. We talk about return on investment. Well, you're not going to get a better return on investment. To Nancy's point, we have to bring this money back in so that we can deploy it to be able to build our brands and to build our business systems.
Fantastic. Nothing could be more important, and what a great initiative, and please support it in any way you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.